Now, real people, real opinions. Nighttime talk with Niall Boylan.
Ireland's classic hits radio.
Now, in case you haven't heard of the Gaelic Woodland Project, it's a skill-sharing social experiment for the creation of a forest to commemorate the famine. They raised €70,000 to purchase their first 12 acres in Mayo with an oak woodland and wetland, and they've recently submitted a report to the Oireachtas to prohibit the sale of invasive species in garden centres. Currently, it's legal. So I'll find out a bit more about that in a second, and what that entails. But the group will resume their Mihal next year, where they meet as a community to remove invasive species. And I'm looking here, some of the stuff, by the way, obviously they talk about Brehon Law, which is valued our wildlife and nature, and those that lived under the Brehon Law had a special appreciation for trees in native Ireland. Anyway, look, I want to speak because there's so much to talk about in relation to this. Eoghan Connaughton joins me on the line. Eoghan, hi, how are you?
Hey Niall, great to be here. Thanks very much.
Good. I've never spoken to environmental scientists before, but there you go. There's always a first.
Oh, so I'll be the best then.
I mean, for people who don't know, exactly what your skill set is, for an environmental scientist, I mean, what is your focus mainly on?
Well,
the environment.
Yeah, the environment, the planet with which we live on. But there's loads of different skill sets within that. Like, you can be a geologist, you could be an ecologist. I specialise in landscape design, so I look at where water and forestry meet and ecology.
Oh, okay. All right, okay. So tell me a little bit more first, if you can, about the Gaelic Woodland Project and how that came about, and what was the main mission that you hoped to accomplish with that kind of initiative?
Well, I set up the company in 2019, which became a charity, and I was inspired after living in Ontario, northern Canada. I was living in a forest there, a forest school, taking kids from inner-city Toronto. And the idea was to take them away from that environment and reconnect them to nature. But in the process, I became connected to nature, and I saw the changing of the seasons. And I was in my 30s wondering why I'd never seen this before. And then I learned that most of Ireland's forests are commercial plantations. So they don't have the herbaceous layer. They don't have a functional forest ecology.
Okay.
So I was like that, and then learning that was in part the legacy of colonialism. This should be a point of pride for the nation, for those living now. A part of our heritage is to restore the forests that were once so important. So came back home, tried to get something going. Eventually found out that we have to do it ourselves. So set up the company, having never had set up a company before, got the charity, and now there are hundreds of people that have volunteered with us. The whole operation is run by volunteers. We've got a whole cohort of different skill sets. We've got Gaelic scholars. We have lawyers, accountants, Shanachie storytellers, graphic designers.
No radio talk show hosts. No.
And now, Niall, you're in. So it's a very inclusive group. We're bound together by the vision that Ireland deserves to have her forests back. So we've been purchasing farms from farmers that want to retire, and that land is being returned to nature with the idea of creating a forest to commemorate the famine by 2045. That's the 200-year anniversary.
Mm. It's a wonderful idea, and I read somewhere recently, and maybe you correct me if this is completely wrong, right? But that in the last 4 or 5 years, the world has become greener. Now, I know we give out about the planet, and we give out about people cutting down forests to make way for whatever it happens to be, and taking away natural habitats and all that kind of stuff. But generally speaking, the world has become greener, or the planet is greener than it was, say, 100 years ago. Is that true?
I've heard of this as well. Yes, I have. Because there's more carbon in the atmosphere. Carbon's being used by plants for photosynthesis, for their growth. They take the carbon from the atmosphere, and that goes into the woody biomass that for plants and for trees. So I don't know this in detail, but I've heard it from a few sources, and it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and maybe it's my imagination, but I only cut the hedges a while ago, and they already need to be recut again, and I have to wait till September, because obviously you're not supposed to cut them in certain nesting season, so I have to wait to cut them again. But so I find that things just are growing too fast for me to keep up with them. Maybe it's just me getting old and not being as good at keeping the garden straight. But the other things, what were the key kind of challenges that you kind of faced, acquiring and managing land kind of for, restoration purposes, or reforestation purposes, should I say? What were the kind of the challenges that you faced doing that?
The hardest part is getting land. That's it.
Mm.
The trees are there, the volunteers are there. The land is the hard part to get. So we had 36 fundraisers over 16 months, We had, in one weekend, we had a garden party in Cavan and a drum and bass party in Tralee. We had feats of physical endurance. These fine men climbed Carrantoul 8 times in 48 hours, which is the equivalent of climbing the height of Everest. Just a few months back, we walked all the peaks of the Mourne Mountains. And we've had Cayleys, we've had
Is it
storytelling
expensive, the
nights.
land? Because I know, okay, there is land obviously in Ireland which is very expensive, but there's also land in Ireland which farmers would be just glad to get rid of because because it costs the money to keep it.
This is the wonderful, like that point of intersection, because there are farmers that the land isn't productive, and it doesn't make sense for them to continue. It's part of the culture, it's what they've always done, but maybe their children don't want to carry on that farm. So what will happen is that farm will be purchased by the neighbour, and this is a problem that's happening. You have the diminishment of the small farms and the kind of the growth of these massive farms. So what we'd like to do is to create a land fund, a farmers fund, where we can allow farmers to retire. Well, we'll take their land and we turn it into a forest. We name the forest after their family, so it honours the tenure of their family. That thing is really very, very important. A lot of these farmers now, they have their land from the Land Commission in the 1880s, so they're carrying on that legacy. So by creating this type of engagement, where we're going to name this forest after your family. Yeah. It'll be named after your family for forever, and your kids will always be welcome here. We even plant a family tree for them. So what we'd like to do is those small farms where people don't want to farm them anymore, the reason why they're not good for farming is because they don't want to be farms, They want to be bogs or they want to be forests. So that when farmers are having a hard time with land, it's because the land doesn't want to be a field of grass. It wants to be something else.
I mentioned as well at the start, you talked about invasive species. I mean, firstly, you got to explain to me, like I'm a tick, but what are invasive species? These are species that just get out of control, are they?
It's the relationship that they have with the environment around them. So Ireland has 650 native plants, but about 900 have been introduced. Most are fine, but some become tenacious and they take over the environment.
Give me an example. Give me an example of the type of species you're talking about, something that we would be all familiar with, I suppose.
Well, the one that we focus on is the cherry laurel, and you'd know this from your garden centre.
Okay. This
is a high-impact invasive species.
So it grows quickly, spreads quickly, and gets in everybody's way. Is that what you're kind of saying? Or?
It's more than that. This plant comes from Turkey, and in Turkey it's held back by climatic conditions. But here, rich soils, lots of precipitation, it just takes off. It's evergreen, so it's growing the entire year round. The leaves are poisonous, so no other animals eat it. And eventually they create this permanent blanket, this shadow over the forest, and it kills all the native plants in the herbaceous layer, all the native plants on the floor. They stop all new trees from growing. Okay. These things will kill forests.
Right.
And they're very expensive to remove.
If it's having that kind of effect, why are they still legal to sell in garden centres if it's having that kind of effect on an ecosystem?
So our understanding is that the reason why they sell it here is because if they prohibit the sale, they're influencing the single market.
Okay, free market and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Now, so this is a high-impact invasive species, and millions are spent removing it, chipping it. But at the same time, there's 200 hectares of cherry laurel farms in Munster, and those farms are feeding leaves to the European bouquet market. So we're growing highly invasive species for florists, florists in France.
And the other invasive species as well is not just botanical, of course, it's animals. And the grey squirrel, I believe, now you could correct me if I'm wrong here, they've kind of ruined a lot of ecosystems. Thanks to the badger, by the way, we've kept it somewhat under control. But they've kind of ruined a lot of ecosystems.
Well, they've somewhat been naturalised. That there's a conversation to be had there. My big concern are the deer.
Oh, okay.
The deer. So they
wanted to bring the wolves down. I mean, who thought that was a good idea?
I did a survey. I for my master's last year, I did an integrated design for the rewilding of the island of Ireland, and that involved a survey where I think 800 people got back to me, and 73% said they wanted to bring the wolf back.
Right.
100% of farmers said no. All of those people came from the cities.
But that's because the farmers be worried sick about their sheep.
we're sick about their children, their dogs, their cats, everything.
And themselves. I mean,
the post wasn't delivered today.
just very quickly, because I've not have too much time. How does, the historical Brehon law influence kind of your approach to environmental conservation and the woodland management today? I mean, so explain to people firstly about Brehon law, because many people don't understand it.
Okay, Brehon law was an ancient Irish, from Gaelic Ireland, an ancient law system that was put in place, fundamentally different to the Norman laws that were brought in. You could spend a whole episode or a week talking about them, but what's interesting is the relationship of leadership and land. So the leaders weren't necessarily the owners of land, they were the custodians of land. So in Brehon law, common woodland is seen as being, it's very common woodland. But then when you had the expansion of the Norman estates, the commonage got pushed further and further off into marginal lands, and now the commonage makes up 8% of the land, but it's only in the uplands. It's only up in Donegal and Wicklow and stuff. But this used to be island-wide, mostly. It's only with the acts of enclosure in the 17th and 18th centuries where fields were created. That's where most of the hedgerows came from this period. So we want to purchase land to return it to the people.
Right,
so we're creating forests that it's going to be dedicated to the famine, to commemorate that time, but it's also to recognise that during the famine, it wasn't just the mass emigration, it was the collapse of the language. And the reason why people starved, because the forests had been taken away. The forests had been removed.
Ireland used to be an Atlantic rainforest at one stage, but now we've only got about 2-3% cover. But you're never, I don't know what your vision is, of kind of rewilding the country, so to speak, but I don't think we'll ever get it back to anything more than sort of 5 to 10%, would we?
No, the European average, I think, is 32%.
Right.
And we have 2% native species. So
Wow.
there's a lot of work that has to be done.
Yeah.
So what we're doing for our commemorative forest, everybody who donates gets a piece of it. Everyone who donates gets a 21-year license plot. So that's your family
like
plot
a certificate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a certificate, but then every 21 years that can be inherited or renewed. So that means you have this intergenerational cooperation. So you buy the plot now, your kids can take it over, and then your grandkids can take it over, and then intergenerationally we will restore the forests of Ireland. Because it took generations for the forest to be cleared. It'll take generations for them to be returned. And because we're entirely skill sharing, we're a social experiment, none of us are being paid. So all the money that we get, we direct into buying land, and all the trees are free. So, and the manpower is there, the people power, like people want to be there. We've had hundreds of volunteers come out with us. So we purchase the land, we turn them into forests or wetlands. Like we're looking.
I was going to come to the wetlands. I mentioned maybe this is quite controversial now because a lot of farmers are not too happy about it. But of course, the EU's nature restoration law. How has that, or how does that affect what you want to do when you want to achieve the re-wetting of lands? It
actually fits perfectly into what we're doing, but I'm very sensitive to the wellness of rural Ireland.
Yeah.
My family come from Roscommon and Galway,
right?
And I work in Monaghan. I actually work in river restoration in Monaghan, Cavan and Louth. We have land in Mayo for the forest. I'm always engaging with people in rural Ireland, and they're brilliant. And they have stories that are rooted in the landscape. And their families went to such great efforts to turn marginal land into usable fields. So I'm very sensitive to their position. Mm-hmm. But what we want to do is consciously work with those who want to work with us.
Yeah. But do you agree with the nature restoration laws that were brought in the EU?
Well, they need to plan. They need to plan. And
well, there's no money. It's all well and good to tell a farmer he can't use land if you're not going to pay him for it. That's that's why the farmers aren't very happy about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you need to generate income from the land. So, like for example, if you have peat, you can incorporate polludiculture. So you can use polluti means swamp, so it's swamp agriculture, and you can use that to grow cattails, which you can use to make typha board. Typha board is load-bearing insulation. It's one of the expensive components for building houses.
Can I ask you quickly? I've only got a minute and a half left, and the sun's coming in. By the way, Martin, texted in. He said, "Thanks, Niall, but I think he skipped over the grey squirrel question." I don't know if you kind of skipped over rather than it wasn't as big an issue as maybe.
What I would say is the grey squirrel. Yes, you see grey squirrels everywhere. My concern is the deer. The deer are one of the biggest pressures on our remaining native woodlands. They're eating most of the young trees.
Okay.
The deer are a huge concern. I'm not too concerned about the grey squirrel because the pine marten coming back is kind of controlling the growth of the grey squirrel. I think the deer is a bigger issue. and we need to talk about the deer.
Okay, in relation to, finally, climate change. People give out to me all the time. You're not going to like me, by the way, now. You're going to hate me now after the show.
You'd be surprised.
People call me a climate denier. I'm not. I really care about the environment. I really care about the climate. I agree the climate is changing all of the time. And I agree that we're in a very difficult situation as a planet. And we need to look after it. But where I differ from some people, and I watched lots of documentaries, I've interviewed loads of people in relation to this, where I differ from a lot of people is I believe that our responsibilities and our duties in relation to what we're doing in the climate, not the environment, the climate, is probably overstated. And I don't believe we can do a huge amount. Maybe shave off a couple of 100,000 years, at the very end, whenever this planet comes to an end in a couple of million years' time, if that's the case, or maybe next week, you never know. But I agree with what you're doing, because I think what you're doing is, making more green land, which takes more carbon out of the atmosphere anyway, which is good. Okay, so where do you stand on climate change as an environmentalist?
For me, I think climate change is inevitable. It happens naturally. The rate at which it's happening, yes, it's being influenced by human activity, but it's going to happen anyway. So what I would do is I would focus on climate adaptation. I would focus on preparing the landscape. I love hydrometric modelling because this is very quantifiable, very real records of flood discharges over the last 70 years. We have this data. We know the winters are getting wetter, the summers are getting drier. So on this little
this
island,
year you could have fooled me, by the way, but whatever. This year it hasn't stopped raining all summer, but go on, yeah.
On this island, we need to prepare the landscape for winter floods. So we need to design the landscape in a way where we get ecosystem services. I'm concerned about 76% of our forests are too small to withstand drier summers. So I would expand the native woodlands that we have left. I would be holding water in the uplands to stop flooding in the lowlands, in the urban areas. I would be putting our energies into preparing the landscape for climate change. If it is inevitable, then we need to be prepared for that by preparing the landscape for it. Also, for me, I think it comes down to individual choices. Like, what do you want to do? Where are you spending your money? Like, I've gotten rid of most of my clothes, and I'm making the effort to replace my wardrobe with Irish fabrics. I've got a 3-piece suit made from Tipperary tweed that a friend of mine put together. I'm getting Irish flax to make t-shirts.
Are you a bit of a hippie?
I'm a very well-dressed hippie now.
Oh, listen, I could have a much longer conversation with you. It's really nice to talk to you. It's very interesting. It really is genuinely very interesting. It's really nice to talk to you. And we can have a much longer conversation. By the way, if people want to donate or they want to help in some way or get involved, what's the best way for them to do that?
If you go onto the website or check us out on any social media, GaelicWoodlandProject.com, if you make a donation, all of that money is put aside to go into buying land.
Okay.
And also this Saturday, we're going to be giving away 10 tons of free firewood that we harvested from invasive species. Okay. So if you go onto our Instagram, you can find information about that. Okay,
so it's GaelicWoodland.com.
Gaelic Woodland Project.
Oh, project, sorry. GaelicWoodlandProject.com. If you go on there, you can get all the information you need. It's been really nice talking to you, Eoghan. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Niall. Thank you so much.
All right, see you then. Bye-bye.
Now, real people, real opinions. Nighttime Talk with Niall Boylan.
Ireland's classic hits radio.
McCarthy Insurance Group, serving the community for over 70 years. For home, farm, motor, life, health and business insurance, log on to mig.ie or free phone 1800 50 11 11. Probably your best call in 2024. Charles McCarthy Insurance is trading as McCarthy Insurance Group, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.